let's get into some Sixers and NBA right now. Ryen Russillo from the Russillo Podcast, ESPN, and he joins us right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as Sixers even series up 1-1, and we'll talk some NBA with Ryen Russillo. What's going on, Rye?
Not much, man. How are you guys? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we are. I guess people have calmed down. You know Philly could be a little irrational, and after Game 1, the irration level was at around a 9.5.
Yeah, but I don't really blame them. I mean, it looked bad, and that was one of those Simmons games where the Simmons doubters, and I know there are times where I'm like, what is this guy going to really be in 5 years? You go, his floor is so low. Like, why? When he has a bad game, it's really bad, and then they come back in Game 2, and he reminds you of why we do have all this hope that he can be maybe one of the 10 best players in the league. So the best thing about Game 2 was that Philly gets off to that start. It's emotional. You expect them to be more charged up, and then Brooklyn catches them, and it's because they're shooting from outside so well. And then to see what they did at the start of the third quarter, I think it was a 22 run. And the one thing I think you have to keep doing if you're Philly is you're just so much bigger than they are. And yeah, it was weird when they went small and Embiid was out in Game 1 and they couldn't figure it out. They got diced up. But I don't think it's plays. I don't think it's a system. I don't think it's ball movement or balance. It's just we're huge and we're just going to keep attacking you. And it leads to fouls and it leads to those kinds of runs. So I felt a lot better about them because they're still a team that we don't know what to make of because it's only been we're on year 2 of this, and it's not like there's deep playoff runs to really understand how tough this team can be.
What do you think about Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid playing together, just particularly these last 2 games? Embiid, I mean, the game time decisions, Rye, are driving people nuts in Philly. It's like 3 minutes before tip. It's like, all right, I'm playing. But at Game 1, it seemed like he was completely out of rhythm. And there's a lot of talk with how is Ben's game and Joel's game going to work together, particularly in these playoff series?
Well, before I answer that, I do think you bring up a good point because, being around the NBA, I remember Doc Rivers would always say this great thing. He'd be like, I want their best player to play because if he doesn't, then my team thinks they can just mail it in and it screws everybody up. And he actually ended up being like, whenever I'd see it live, I'd be like, man, he's right. Like he didn't just make that up out of nowhere. And part of me wondered if the Sixers would have been better off if Embiid, it was just decided 2 days ahead of time, like he's not going to be able to go. And, this dumb stuff happens about protecting the message and we can't let anybody know that information. Well, sometimes you can get your own way, trying to be really secretive about what you're doing. But when I watch the 2 of them play, and I love Embiid, okay, there's times this year where I go, this guy, if he's healthy, he might end up being the best player in this league. Seriously, that's how special he is. But they're kind of the worst fit for any teammates as far as a 1 and 5 would go. And granted, Ben's not a traditional point guard at the 1, but Ben Simmons' understanding of spacing and stuff, it's just when it's bad, you go like, what are you doing? Like he knows he can't stand on the perimeter because then somebody sags off of him. So then he'll have to cut and try to bring somebody with him. But a lot of times I feel like he's bringing his guy into the play and Embiid's looking at him going like, what the hell are you doing? So, Simmons is so good on those deep catches against whoever's caught defending him because he's so big. But at times Simmons, I think it's not at times, it's a lot of the times, it feels like he's crowding their offense because he doesn't really know what to do when he doesn't have the ball. So it's, as talented as they both are, I almost feel like a Mike Conley would be the best fit with an Embiid as opposed to, granted, we could say Lillard or Curry or all these other guys, but
yeah, I'll take Lillard.
I'll take Dame.
you guys would do Simmons or Lillard right now?
Absolutely.
What do you think?
Dude, in a heartbeat.
Because, I'm not talking about Lillard for Simmons because that's not happening.
Yeah,
but
it's nothing against Ben.
I feel like, it's the style of point guard that fits best with what Embiid would be. And it's probably not a 6'10" power forward.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just interested. You mentioned something like about what he's going to be in like 5 years. Like, I'm interested to see how much his game evolves. We have people that call all the time, and they're like, name another player who just never – there are players who shot poorly. Rondo wasn't a great shooter. He's kind of turned himself into like an adequate shooter. People talk about Jason Kidd, but – he's someone who just never shot and then all of a sudden started shooting. The only name I came up with, which is kind of funny, was like Brook Lopez, but he's a center, who never shot at all, and now he shoots. Like, where is Ben Simmons 5 years from now? I don't know that anybody can answer that.
Yeah, that's really wishful thinking when somebody starts going like the Jason Kidd route on me, because it happens all the time. Like, I already knew the names you were going to throw at me because, and I'm not saying like you're sitting here going, hey, Jason Kidd couldn't shoot. Like,
right.
When you tweet that, after somebody like Ben Simmons just hasn't developed at all. I mean, you're right. Like, it'd be one thing to miss some shots. It's not even a thought process as a part of his game. And that's a really hard way to live in today's game of basketball. So if somebody counters with the Jason Kidd thing, does that mean I go, cool, so I got to wait like 10 years? Because that's basically what you're saying. Because it wasn't like Jason Kidd developed this thing after a couple of years. And guys that say, oh, you get a shooting coach, you keep working on the stroke. Like, some guys can become decent percentage shooters because they get the muscle memory down in that corner three, and it's really like the only thing. Like, they'll find a spot, maybe just shade it off the top of the three-point line, left or right, where they've taken so many that they have the muscle memory where they feel like they're locked in. But that doesn't really make you some kind of shooter. It just means that there's this one spot on the floor you kind of feel comfortable. And when you have the ball in your hands all the time, that's not really being a shooter. So, the Rondo thing, I don't know about that. I mean, I watched that guy majority of his career, and, he developed this one little spot of the elbow where he was okay, but he's still somebody you could ignore. So whenever anybody says that, because that's like the most hopeful Ben Simmons person going, oh, kid, it's like, okay, cool. So I'll just check in 2029 and we'll see where we're at.
Right. So the Ben Simmons that we got last night, the one that was aggressive, can they advance? Forget the Nets. I think a lot of people think they'll beat the Nets, and if they don't, then it's an utter disappointment. But can they beat the Milwaukees, the Torontos, the Bostons with that Ben Simmons? They certainly can't with the guy we saw Saturday.
Yeah, well, I absolutely wouldn't rule that one out at all, because that's why when you're supposed to be really good, that's why we're more critical of you. When it's year one, it's fun, but when it's year two and there's duds like game one, like, he can be upset, or Sixers fans can be upset. Be like, no, there's a reason we're doing that to him and not Chris Middleton, because we have higher hopes for Simmons and we're more excited about what the prospects are. And just those secondary cuts, and there was that cut by Embiid last night where Simmons kept the play alive, and it seemed like they were totally on the same page, because once Embiid or Simmons get running, there's really not much you can do to stop them going downhill unless you want to, move second or sometimes even third defender over. I'm not going to say they can't, but I know what Milwaukee is. I'm pretty sure I know what Toronto is, although, Lowry had one of his all-time playoff games in game one. And I mean that sarcastically. I'm not going to say no, but we both know, like, another bad invisible Simmons game is coming at some point, and it just can't be in a game 6 or 7. So, that would still worry me.
What do you think about the Eastern Conference landscape just through one or two games now, Rye? Because I was going to bring up playoff Lowry's game one performance, dropping the 0. It seems a little bit wide open. Boston still don't know what to expect. I kind of want your thoughts on them now since last time we spoke, but it seems completely wide open, and maybe Milwaukee's for the taking, but I can't even really put a finger on it yet.
I have a really hard time when it's the first time through. So I know every Milwaukee stat, and they are probably the most complete team in the NBA, even though I would say Golden State defensively, it's not an inability to play defense. It's just being over the whole thing and expecting to flip that switch. And so when I look at Milwaukee, I go, okay, but you're right. Why couldn't Philadelphia beat Giannis and then the second best player being Bledsoe and Middleton? Like, why couldn't that happen? And it looks like they're going to get Brogdon back here in the second round. He's a nice piece for them, and Lopez is good, but in some games Lopez won't be able to be out there. Against Philly, he would be out there a lot. Toronto, Kawhi at the end of that game was really good. And you're going, man, this is why he's a top 5 player. He's making great plays offensively. There's really not much you can do with him. And that game, to me, that's a nice game from Orlando, but it could have gone either way on a make from Gasol or a miss from one of the wings for Orlando. And then Boston, that Pacers team isn't that good. It was a nice story post Oladipo, but really they were beating the teams they were supposed to. And then once they started playing better teams, they weren't beating any of them. And Boston sleptwalked through the first half of game one, and then cranked up their defense. And you see a Gordon Hayward that, is not Utah All-Star Gordon Hayward, but the last few weeks there's something to at least feel better about. So as I rattle through all this stuff, I'm not going to tell you I know, or it's not knowing, I don't have a real strong take on saying, hey, it's this team in the East and everybody else. So that was the longest way ever of agreeing with you.
I'll take it.
Well, we know, I think most people thought it was going to be the 4 teams. It should be the 4 teams, and we'll see how they all match up. I personally, if I'm a Sixer fan, I don't know about you, I think I'd rather play Milwaukee than Toronto. And
Definitely.
that's even with playoff Lowry.
You'd rather play Milwaukee than Toronto.
I think I'm on Philly.
Yeah. For us, for Philly, I agree.
Toronto's just a
The
tough.
weird thing about Toronto is if everybody played, they would have been the 1 seed.
Right.
And
how many games did
we
Kawhi miss? Like 30?
I think he played 59 games, so I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
A little less than that, but
23.
Yeah, he missed some games. The weird thing about Toronto is that Siakam goes from, hey, that guy's kind of nice, like I like him coming off the bench, to he would be their go-to guy when Kawhi wasn't around, and it was fine.
Yeah.
Like that guy was really getting his own buckets. It's almost like they have this sneaky second all-star that nobody really thinks about. And I'll expect, Lowry to play better than he did in Game 1, and it's kind of funny how, guys that are with teams, media members that are really, really close to teams, they start putting out all the propaganda that Lowry's actually been sneaky better than everybody realizes in the playoffs, which is just laughable. I mean, he's been efficiency-wise one of the worst. Anyone who's ever made an all-star team in the last however many years, 5, 6 years playing in the playoffs, efficiency-wise, he's near the bottom of anyone who's played in an all-star game that's also in the playoffs for this many times. So, that scares me. But they have a lot of depth. Yeah, I'll go with that because the great thing for Philadelphia is that at least they'd have enough size to try to team concept slow down Giannis, but that means they're just going to spread them out to death, and it's going to screw up how they help. And I will tell you that when Giannis went up against Ben Simmons the last 2 times I saw him, Simmons offered zero resistance whatsoever, even though there should be some similarity body-wise.
Yeah.
And, I would show Simmons video of that stuff being like, this guy has zero respect for you. I mean,
Just be like, even Antetokounmpo's booing you. That'll get him turned.
Yeah, right. He's firmly on the other side. Giannis went at Embiid big time in that last game.
Yeah,
where
he
I'm
did.
like, man, this guy isn't afraid at all. And he might be just good enough to get out of the East. And I wouldn't say by himself because their concept's good. They have kind of like good 1 through 7 players, but he's just at another level right now.
Listen to the Russillo podcast, a lot of NBA, the playoffs. We've got Portland tonight and Oklahoma City at 10 o'clock. We'll have Sixers Thursday night. You can listen to every Sixer playoff game on 97.3. Boston on Friday and a doubleheader with Boston Golden State on Sunday. Ryen Russillo on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Ryen, we appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, guys. Good luck.